Hey everyone, it is May 1st, 2015. I'm Rene Ritchie, and right now we're going to chat about Apple earnings, we're going to talk about MacBooks, and oh yeah, the Apple Watch Week 1. This is the iMore Show. Joining me as always, back on the East Coast, we have Senator Caldwell. How are you, Ren?
Good. I'm doing well, although I did just discover that iCloud Photo Library was eating my data connection, so I'm
We
a
joked
little
about
grumpy
that.
about that.
It actually was
Oh
iCloud.
my gosh.
iCloud. It uses
That's
a lot of data.
That's what Rene said when you cut out. He was like, it's iCloud Photo Library.
Well, they're not throttling it yet. They really need to put some sort of throttle on that thing.
Mm-hmm.
That was the lovely voice of the equally lovely Ali Kazmuha. How are you, Ali?
Good.
Only good?
Yeah, it's nice out, so better.
You can enjoy your 2 months of niceness before Michigan becomes freezing again?
Yeah, we're not as bad as Canada, so I might have 4 months. You only have 2 months.
All right. And also the equally lovely Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Fine. How you doing, Renee?
Good. We were just saying that it's lamentable that DC Comics hasn't pinged you for one of the movie roles for their major villains yet.
You know what? My shooting calendar is booked with kaiju stuff this summer, so I couldn't work it into my schedule anyway.
They'll get Eric Stoltz instead. That's what they do.
There we go.
All right, so let's get started with Apple earnings first. We'll run through this. Ren, the iPhone is still making ungodly amounts of money. It looks like it made more money in its second quarter than in everything but this last holiday quarter. I think we froze Ren again.
Everything just froze for me.
Oh, sorry. I was asking you about iPhone earnings.
Yes, yes, the iPhone did make a lot of money. I think it's 61 million devices, is that right?
Yeah.
61.1 million, which is pretty insane. People are still buying iPhones, especially if they happen to live in Asia. They're China Mobile and China Unicom, not Unicorn, sadly, are doing banner business for Apple, and they seem to be raking it in, so to speak. Which is really exciting. You know, people are still buying iPhones despite the fact that we probably will have an iPhone coming down the corner. I suspect that might be in part also because of this thing, which requires an iPhone. And of course, we've got great iPhone sales. We haven't even heard about Apple Watch sales yet because they weren't actually
We lost Ren again.
calculated in this next time. And then, of course, there's the iPad.
Yeah, so the interesting thing with the iPhone for me, and Tim Cook said that Chinese New Year is huge in Asia. If you're not familiar with it, it's become this day-long celebration, and traditionally you don't give someone a present because it's considered presumptuous to try to figure out what they will want. So you give them money, you put it in a hongbao, which is a red envelope, and then they take that money and they buy whatever they want. And a lot of them, it turns out, are buying iPhones, and that's partially the growing middle class. And then Tim Cook was asked specifically, like, does he think it's middle class? And he said the numbers they're seeing means that it can't just be the top earners in the country anymore. They have to be penetrating into the middle class and maybe even slightly beyond the middle class. And that's really interesting because it looks like China is going to become the major market for Apple, and they're investing heavily in it. Did I remember this right? There's going to be 40 stores in there by the end of the year?
Something like that, yeah. China is definitely something that they are keeping an eye on and really, really focusing on coming years.
It's the iPad. I mean, a lot of people are. Oh, sorry, we lost you again, Ren.
No. I was saying it's going to be a factor in the coming years, no question. And in addition to that, the fact that there are so many iPhones being bought in China really does suggest the presence of some kind of middle class by snapping up iPhones, as you mentioned, which is potentially a huge market for, Apple was told for years that they couldn't get into that market because, their products are too expensive. Xiaomi and the other Chinese manufacturers have that market sewn up. But it seems like Apple's doing pretty well.
It's no, it is, and the BRIC countries in general, Brazil, Russia, India, China, are going to be massive growth opportunities for Apple. And like you say, even they do keep around old units at lower prices, but the numbers that they're getting suggest that they're still making significant profit. When you look at other companies, like Samsung has been hurt by the discount Chinese, and maybe discount is not a fair word, but the less expensive Chinese competition. I don't know how well those competitors are all doing. I haven't been keeping track of their results, but Samsung did not have a good quarter. Apple had a really good quarter. The only people are spinning the iPad as a downside, Ali. So I'm curious how you feel about this, because I still feel like if you take the iPad and make it its own business, like anyone in the world would love to have that amount of money and revenue as a business.
Yeah, well, and if Apple's own products are cannibalizing its other products, I don't necessarily see that as a bad problem for Apple. It could be worse. I don't know. I've always felt like the iPad is kind of one of those, I don't want to say a niche product, but it has a different user base, if that makes sense. Some people just need a Mac and an iPhone. Some people don't want a Mac and they want an iPad instead. So I don't feel like it's fair to compare the iPad to iPhone sales. I know a lot more people that have iPhones and have use cases for it. Everyone needs a phone. Not everyone needs an iPad. So I don't know. It's interesting to me that they're sliding, but I can kind of see why. I think it's more fair to compare it to Mac metrics than it is iPhone, which surprisingly I think Mac went up, didn't it?
Yeah, the Mac went up again. The iPad is still sold faster than the iPhone, than any other. I think sold than any other product. The acceleration was tremendous. It did drop off, but that might be a factor first, that the refresh cycle is longer. People don't buy new iPads every year the way they buy phones every 2 years, and we've seen that with the Mac, but we didn't know what it would be with the iPad. Also, the iPad is in this really weird, and I know you've written about this, Trinity, but the iPad is in this really weird spot right now where the hardware is ridiculous. What Apple's chipset division is doing is insane. A lot of companies would say the A7 is fine, take a few years off, don't do anything else. They made the A8X, which to me is just more powerful than iOS can take advantage of. But I think these rumors that we're hearing about next generation iPads, maybe with Force Touch, could make it more interesting again.
Absolutely. I really believe that kind of we're on the edge of what the iPad can and can't do. The iPad is, I think it needed to be released when it was released, basically as a proof of, like, look, the tablet computer can be useful and can provide a great use case for the people who can make it work for them. You look at Federico Viticci, who has made, he runs his business off of his iPad, which is really awesome. Not everybody can do that. However, I think that the innovations that Apple has been working on, both on the Mac lineup and on the iOS lineup, with the watch and with Force Touch and with the Force trackpads and all of that, that could integrate into the iPad in a huge way. My shoot for the moon kind of scenario is, imagine an iPad that gave you haptic feedback as you typed. So it was no longer typing on a glass keyboard, but you could actually feel the keys as you put your hands down, and as you pressed down, it felt like you were pressing.
We can still hear you.
Yeah, I finished my thought.
Oh, okay, sorry, because you cut out for 1 second, then you cut right back, and it was over. So I wasn't
sure.
Oh,
no, yeah, I was just saying haptics that could make you feel like you're pressing into a key, as opposed to just pressing on glass. And that can be translated to any number of things. Translated to drawing, making it feel less like you're sketching on glass and maybe more like you're sketching on a physical surface. I mean, the iPad is huge, and that gives it the advantage of having, that 10+ hour battery life. So Apple can experiment with having a little bit more haptics. Maybe that takes a ding into the battery life, but it gives you a more well-rounded experience with your iPad, and I think that might be really cool. Whether or not we'll see it this year is another question entirely. There's still the rumors of the iPad Pen and all of that. It's kind of fallen by the wayside in the event of the watch and everything else. But I do think that it's potentially on the horizon and something we can look forward to. Tim Cook certainly doesn't feel he still feels bullish. Tim Cook still feels bullish on the iPad, and he's not worried. And I feel like if the company's CEO is not worried about iPad numbers, then analysts, you can take it with a grain of salt. But like it would be one thing if Apple's entire business was the iPad, right? But at this point, the iPad's like 10% of its business. It's not necessarily something that need to worry about terribly.
That's the part. I should just add in Shenyi, who contributes to iMore and Android Central, is listening to the podcast, and on Twitter he said that he got an iPhone 6 Plus in China for Chinese New Year, and there's actually a lot of middle class people who are buying iPads as well just to have one because they're big on their brands. And that the thing to me that you said about the CEO not being worried, I would take it a step further. There are mobile companies on the verge of bankruptcy that analysts are just fine with. That the iPad is making gobs of money by any other measure except when put against Apple's products like the iPhone. It's a fantastic business, and yes, it's going down, but it's still supremely profitable, and it addresses an area, and we'll get to the Mac sales in just a second. It still addresses an area for people who just can't use traditional computers, who don't find them accessible or engaging enough. The iPad is a great alternative. They're just keeping them for 2 or 3 or 4 years, which changes how frequently they buy them, which changes a lot of metrics for Apple. But I'm hugely optimistic, and I think that Apple is patient as a company. I mean, Peter can talk about this in a second, but with the Mac, they were fine making lots of money on a very small part of the market and rode that up and down for years before their latest takeoff. And now it's been quarter after quarter of improvements. And I think with the iPad, they're happy to have it on the market. Like Ali said, iPhone 6 Plus might eat into it from below, MacBook might eat into it from above, but they have that product, and people who want it can get it from them. And I think that's going to be hugely valuable to them 5 years from now, 10 years from now. Peter, those Mac numbers, though.
Yeah, pretty sweet Mac numbers this quarter. It's pretty remarkable, actually. Something interesting happened this quarter that we haven't seen since 2011, and that is that Apple's revenue for Macs was actually bigger than its revenue for iPads. Now, one can argue that's because iPad sales are on the decrease, but the fact is that Mac sales were on the increase as well. They sold a lot of Macs, and one of the reasons why they sold a lot of Macs is the same thing that we were talking about earlier in the podcast, China. Mac sales in China have been off the charts. Tim Cook actually called them unbelievable during his Q&A with analysts after Apple published its numbers. 31% year-over-year increase in Mac sales in China. That's remarkable. I mean, in fairness, all Apple products and services have been exploding in China, but the Mac is not immune to this either, which is great. Interestingly, China is just like the rest of the world in that people are kind of staying away from the PC in droves. PC sales in China are expected to contract 5% this year. Meanwhile, Apple's selling more Macs than ever. So great news for Apple and the Mac. And it's not just China. Worldwide, people are buying Macs.
I have a question for you, Peter, and maybe you guys want to weigh in on it too, because I was looking at the MacBook and what that sort of portends for Apple's lineup, and I'm not sure. I like highly competitive markets, and I'm not sure how to compete with that kind of stuff. Like, do you go to Microsoft and say, hey, we need some sort of Taptic API? How do the when Apple is really zeroing in and making their competitive strength things that are unique about how they develop integrated products? And traditionally, like Dell was famous for giving you tons of options, but being able to modularly assemble something doesn't give you the Taptic trackpad. That's right, the touch trackpad. It doesn't give you a lot of the elements that OS X is really focusing on now. So I want to see how Dell and HP and all the other manufacturers are going to respond.
It'll be interesting for sure. The question is really how Microsoft is going to respond, right? Because Microsoft's got the holistic idea now of how Windows 10 can sort of niche itself into every environment, and they've got some great hardware too. I mean, the Surface Pro 3 is a fantastic device for what it's doing, and I actually like Windows phones quite a bit. Both of my sons have them. It's a solid platform. So it'll be very interesting to see how Microsoft and other companies respond to Apple going forward with the stuff that they're zeroing in on. And it's interesting to me also that Tim Cook was so forceful in his comments to analysts that everybody recognizes that the MacBook is the future of the laptop. I think that's very telling, and I think that if you take away from that, everything's going to be small and iPhone-like and have a processor that you don't like. You're taking away the wrong message. We've already seen the Force Touch trackpad make its way into the 13-inch Retina MacBook Pro. we'll undoubtedly see that keyboard technology spread like wildfire. Apple's putting a lot of innovation into the MacBook that I think is going to spread through the rest of the product line very quickly.
I absolutely agree, and Serenity wrote about that before, about how quickly Apple went from having Force Press on the watch to having Force Press in OS 10, and maybe soon in iPads. And
Force Touch on the iPad, I mean on the MacBook's trackpad is so bizarre because it's initially, when you first experience it, it's so similar to what you're used to, but then you shut the computer off and that trackpad just goes dead. It's weird.
No, it absolutely is, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. One of the super interesting things to me, Ali, and I'd love your take on this because you spent so much time ninjing up all your devices. Tim Cook was asked about margins on the Apple Watch, and they weren't as high as a lot of people wanted. And he pointed to companies like iSupply who do these teardowns and say that this is how much the components cost, as not being realistic gauges. He actually told the analyst he should dig deeper. And I kind of equated that to saying a human being is worth the sum of the water and minerals that make up their body, which is not an adequate measure. But I also think Apple is doing so much customization. Like, I saw all the teardown people struggling to really understand what components they're even using anymore because there's so much custom stuff in there.
Well, and I think a lot of the problem with a lot of these companies, without me going on a rant, is they're trying to add up raw component cost, but they're not looking at the overall, how much did it cost Apple to produce that chip, and R&D costs and everything else that goes into producing a product. So when you average all that in, the cost is probably a lot higher. So, I mean, and then there's really no way for them to know what Apple gets things from suppliers for. So, I mean, I know just in the time that I did, bulk iPhone, iPad repairs, my price was a heck of a lot different than what a regular person buying a replacement battery or replacement screen or anything else would have been. So there's no way for them to really gauge what it costs Apple to produce a product. And I think someone else said something like, producing the second iPhone cost $67, producing the first iPhone cost $400 million. So, and that's a perfect gauge of, you have no way of knowing what Apple's costs were in that. Sure, you can look at 10Ks and financial statements and see what they put into R&D, but those breakdowns are only so meaningful.
Yeah, I think their interest is mainly because the analysts and the investors want the highest possible margins, where those of us buying the products want margins that let Apple keep making these kind of products, but also don't damage us too severely in the wallet while we're buying them now.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's sort of the balance. Peter, anything else stand out for you in the conference call?
Let's see. On the Mac end, the only other thing that really jumped off the page at me was that Apple managed to sell a lot of Macs without flooding the retail channel with inventory. This has happened with them with iPads once or twice, right? Where they've sort of overestimated public demand for iPads and then had to scale it back, and it made their balance sheets look worse for iPads.
Right? They did a 1.1 million adjustment on iPad.
Right, exactly, and this isn't the first time it's happened. Apple managed to leave the quarter with about the same amount of Macs in inventory than it started with. That's a good thing, and it shows, I think, also that Apple's ramping up approach to the MacBook is probably pretty smart. Especially considering it's got new technology, and we'll see where everything goes. But it's just a little frustrating not being able to walk into a store and walk out with one right away.
Do you get a sense of that's changed? Because it seems like the built-to-order 1.3 went out, and people are getting them more now.
That's right, absolutely. The built-to-order 1.3 has just started shipping this past week or so, and that's the high-end model. It's, I think, $1,750 if you configure it with the 1.3.
Sorry, I don't mean to break in, but people have been asking this. Is it really worth getting the 1.3? Because I kind of feel like a lot of people are saying the Turbo Boost is so similar anyway, and they fire Turbo Boost so often that I don't know how much difference it really makes.
I think you've got to have a realistic expectation of what the machine can do. If you try loading it up with a ton of apps or apps with very big documents in memory, you're going to bog down pretty quickly. But if you're just using the MacBook to run one or two or even three apps that have modest memory footprints and whatever, it doesn't matter which processor you get. My sole experience with the MacBook is on the 1.1 gigahertz processor, the base model 1299. I think it's perfectly adequate for general use. I wouldn't buy a loaded to the gills, murdered out MacBook with the expectation that it's going to replace my Retina MacBook Pro. No.
Ren, you did, as always, the phenomenal "This is Tim." Any other takeaways you got?
No, other than Tim is in full form, firing off against his analysts. And thank you also, Renee helped on that, and he's not taking any of the credit, which is very sad. No, I always think that, we didn't used to transcribe Tim's opening remarks, and now I always do, because I think there's some interesting tidbits that he drops in there that it's a candor that we don't usually hear from Apple in pre-prepared remarks. And though he reads them very speedily, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. The environmental stuff that he was talking about in terms of making Apple's activities basically carbon neutral in China is a big thing that they're seeking, and that would be huge. Apple has repeatedly said that it's very committed to the environment, but the fact that they are going out of their way to build so many solar farms and data centers with solar panels on top of them, and really working to make sure that their carbon footprint is as small as possible, given as much that they produce, I think that's really, really admirable.
Yeah, it's he did stop saying "This is Tim" every time he speaks now, because I believe he actually understands that Luca Maestri's accent is different enough from his own that we can infer the speaker.
Oh, yeah,
Luca.
Luca's doing well. I mean, like this is Apple's third CFO transition. We went from Anderson to, I'm blanking on who was after Anderson. I apologize. Oppenheimer, and now we have Maestri, and it seems like he's doing a great job. Everything is just the trucks are still delivering on time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's what I appreciate also about him is that he's very interactive with analysts when they start asking questions. During the Q&A. So he's engaged. He makes a lot of sense. He gives a different perspective on the company's operations than you get from Tim. So I think that they're a powerful combination when you're listening to those calls. I know that many of, the inside baseball is that many of us who listen to these calls quarter after quarter always kind of roll our eyes and have snarky things to say about the questions the analysts ask. But it's not really about the analysts, is it? It's an hour of Tim and Luca speaking candidly about the company that they run. That's a kind of insight and sort of information that if you're an enthusiast about Apple or just interested in tech in general, is actually a really interesting thing to listen to.
There were no major attacks on the competition, which sometimes the funnest parts of the call. There was no Gene Munster question about Apple Television, which is sometimes the most predictable part of the call. He did say, Ali, that new buyers are still coming to the iPhone, and people are switching from Android to iPhone in greater numbers than ever before.
I don't know. I think the whole Android iOS debate could be beaten into the ground. People are always going to switch back and forth. I think there's a certain amount of tinkerers out there and fiddlers that are just going to do that. And then there's other people that really don't care what phone they use or what ecosystem they're using. They're looking for the best deal from their carrier. So you're always going to get those back and forth people.
I think the big screens helped with. I think some people just wouldn't go to an iPhone because they didn't have big screens until.
Yeah, the 6 Plus I think is a huge factor because of the big screens. I know a lot of people that went from a Note to an iPhone 6 Plus. I think Apple sometimes has a greater retention rate because they get you and you can't leave. It's like a caged box, like iMessage and some of the things that you use. I would hate to even think about going to another platform because of all the apps and the music and all of the things that I would lose going to Android. So I think that plays into effect for a lot of people too. And I've had to remind people of that. Sometimes they're like, well, I'm going to get this Android because it's cheaper. I'm like, well, the hundreds of dollars in apps that you bought aren't going to transfer over to your Android phone. But the same holds true the other way around too. So.
Yeah. Well, it's gonna be super interesting. We're in that, Serenity alluded to this earlier. We're in Q3 now, when people's eyes start turning towards September, and there's no more seasonal boosts like Christmas or Chinese New Year. So my expectations, Ren, is that we're like Q3 we'll see the usual like blockbuster release, and then sort of the quiet period before the next one.
I assume so, yeah. I think WWDC is going to be really important for developers in terms of setting the stage for stuff that's going to come down the line. I'm kind of hoping we'll hear more about the Force Touch API, and we'll get, of course, a sneak preview of the next version of iOS and OS 10. And I'm really excited to see how that looks. Maybe we'll see Watch 1.1, which is, I think, technically Watch 8.3, Watch OS. Yeah, and then in the fall we'll have our yearly hardware. At least, assuming that Apple is not going to buck tradition this year and be like, just kidding, we're not going to have an iPhone this year. You guys have the watch, that's fine.
We're switching to hot tubs.
We're going to take a quick break
so I can tell you about Red Hat. Red Hat it's tried, it's trusted, it's tested on a little thing called the internet. Now, I worked in enterprise for longer than I would like to or care to admit, and we used Red Hat, and we used it for a lot of the reasons that I'm about to tell you that we used it. Now, at this point, everyone understands that in the right situations, open source software is important technology. Almost every platform that we use every day, even the ones we think of as proprietary, have major components that are open source because it's useful, because it's powerful. No one really disagrees with that. The most successful open source project of all time is a little thing called the internet. Tim Berners-Lee put the World Wide Web together, and he put it in the public domain. There's also Berkeley Unix, TCP/IP, BSD, which is the foundation of the Mac, Android, the Internet of Things, all sorts of things. People only really disagree about what's meant, about whether open source software is enterprise friendly, enterprise ready. There's a lot of big companies, a lot of very powerful companies that made a lot of money by keeping enterprise software proprietary and locking people into upgrade cycles. And there is an alternative. We found out there was an alternative when I worked in enterprise, and there absolutely is for a lot of people. Red Hat has been key to settling this debate, one customer at a time for over a decade. They started with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and today they certify and support application development, storage, cloud infrastructure for every conceivable enterprise deployment. New York Stock Exchange, DreamWorks, each and every airline, healthcare companies, giant telecoms, Fortune Global 500, and on and on. They all rely on Red Hat. In fact, more than 90% of all companies in the Fortune 500 are Red Hat customers. Why? Because they get powerful, constantly improving innovation of open source without the risk of having to do it alone. It's that simple. Red Hat, enterprise software trusted in the world's most demanding data centers. And I'll just add in there that often, you can do pretty amazing things with it, things that you can't always do easily with proprietary software, and sometimes it even costs a lot less. So find out what Red Hat can do for you. Just go to redhat.com. Thanks, Red Hat. Oh, so many hot tubs. All right, so Ali, Serenity, you've had your Apple Watches for a week now. I'll start with you, Ali. So what's the Apple Watch like a week later?
I find myself caring a lot less about where my iPhone is, so that's good. I think a week with it, I use my phone way too much, so I think I've almost kind of always known that. And I think we touched on this in the last podcast. Mainly, it's not because I want to, it's because I go to do something that is important, and then I get tied up in 20 things that aren't important. So I do find myself being more productive with it, which I don't think I really expected because I mainly wanted an Apple Watch for fitness and health reasons. I kind of went into it with the assumption that I'm going to use it for that and then probably not really pay too much attention to it, and that hasn't been the case. So far I'm impressed. I do feel like there's little things. It's a 1.0 product, and I feel like sometimes, like if you're holding your wrist like this and your apps take an incredibly long time to load. That's something I'd really like to see fixed in a next iteration. But I've noticed when I'm doing this, the screen goes off, and then I have to start the process over again sometimes because I'll either move my wrist, it thinks I put it down, or you know what I mean. It's just there's pain points that make it a little bit difficult to use with other apps. So those are little things I'm sure that will improve over time. But as a fitness tracker, as a helping me triage things, I find that it's working pretty well.
And how's the battery life been for you?
My battery life is a lot worse than Heather's. Last night I ended the night at like 18% by like 9 or 10 p.m. She had like 60. I'm going to attribute a lot of that probably to the fact that I'm taking screenshots all day for iMore and fiddling with it for work. So I think as that winds down over, which probably won't be for a while, but once that does, I think that maybe it'll be a better gauge. But I do feel like it does get me through the whole day, and I put on my Apple Watch at probably 6:30 in the morning.
What are you at right now?
So,
it's about 6 hours later.
5 hours later, I am at 85%. And I did use it to log an hour-long walk this morning. So.
Nice. I'm at 97%. I put mine on 3 hours ago. But I haven't done any how-tos yet today. How about you, Ren? A week later?
Well, I'm at 93% on my watch. I am loving it a week later. It is a 1.0 product, and there are definite pain points where I was timing things for roller derby last night, and I was like, oh, the timer is really useful, but if the screen goes off, then you go back to the clock face and all of that, and I want to just be able to. I also found myself doing old Casio habits where I'm like, I want to press the digital crown to start the timer. But honestly, overall, I find that, like Allie, it's really helped me disassociate from my phone and pick up my phone for specific tasks, rather than just pick up my phone being like, I'm bored. Oh boy, now I'm going to read Instagram for 20 minutes. If I have to pick up my phone, it's in very specific unipurpose reasons. Or I'm doing something on my watch, and I will send handoff a specific task to my iPhone. It really helps when I can't get distracted by all of the pretty home screen icons. So I'll just be like, open, this thing on Safari, and the watch is like, I can't do that, but your iPhone can, and then I'll swipe up, and it'll automatically send me to where I need to go. Is this micromanaging me so that I can't, goof around? Probably. But I like it. I think it works really well. I love dictation and Siri on this thing. I think I mentioned that during our first podcast, but oh man, this is so nice. I did a couple of call handoffs. I used this thing in the car for the first time, and that was awesome. Driving home, I didn't have to touch my phone once to make sure that I was going where I needed to be going. And I was able to answer a call on my watch without having to fiddle with anything. It was really nice. Again, definite pain points, definite things that take too long. Third-party apps take too long. There are too many taps associated with some things. But overall, I really like it.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience. So I hate it when Kevin Mitchell buys Apple products because it means he whines to me instead of Phil Nicholson with Android products. And he got his Apple Watch, and I just got a steady stream of how do I do this? Is so dumb. What's going on? But some of them some of them are Kevin being Kevin, but some of them I thought were legitimate. Like, for example, there's still not a complete parity between settings on the watch and settings on the app. And all he was trying to do was turn off the activate on wrist rotation, on wrist raise. And on the Apple Watch app on the iPhone, all you can do is switch between clock face and last app. But on the Apple Watch itself, you can switch between those, but also disable it. And if that setting had been on the phone, he would have found it much faster because that was his first instinct, was to do everything on the phone because that's how he set it up. And we had an interesting discussion. I'd be interested in your guys' thoughts, and Peter too, because you're going to deal with a bunch of people eventually, coming into your store with these problems. Kevin felt that maybe Apple should have done less to begin with. Not less in the watch, but when you enable the watch, it asks to transfer over all your apps. It can transfer over all your notifications. And his thinking was maybe if it didn't, if it just let you add apps over time or prompted you to add more notifications over time and didn't give you everything to start with, he felt more people would be turning stuff off than would be turning stuff on. So if you targeted it on minimal interactions at first and let people build them up, it'd be more useful than giving them everything and having to force them to turn them off.
Yeah, I agree with that. Honestly, when I set my watch up, I intentionally set it up without any of the apps and then just added on my apps manually because I actually remember getting my iPhone 3G and installing every app known to humankind that I could on it, and that was a disaster for about 3 weeks and also killed my iPhone's battery life. So I decided to start minimalist here and then build up, and that actually gave me a really good couple of days to figure out what I really wanted to see on my wrist and what that I could turn off. I mentioned on the podcast Monday, but I've turned off haptics for everything except a few select notifications, and that has improved my daily calmness so much because I'm not constantly being like, buzz, oh no, something's wrong, and it's like, oh, it's just a hip chat or it's just a Instagram notification, which if those can happen in some frequency when you first post a picture.
Yeah, I minimized everything. I have everything minimized on my iPhone. Like I think I've said before that the only thing that can actually make sound on my iPhone is messages, VIP email, calendar, and phone or FaceTime calls. And I put up an article about this because I really want VIP for everything. VIP is still a mail only thing, but I would really prefer it if, like, Peter Serenity and Allie, their messages would come through. But Rogers, do you want to take advantage of this plan that you're already taking advantage of? Messages didn't bother me every so goddamn always. But that sort of stuff I think would be really good. But having the minimal notifications has made my life so much better in so many ways. And the watch has forced me to reduce. Like I used to have Instagram comments, like not likes or anything, but just comments come up so I could see them because people were complaining I wasn't responding to them in Instagram comments, and I have these huge guilt issues. But I really don't need that information. So I just turned it off, and I'm still happier. Like Twitter, I have Twitter DMs on, but I used to get at replies from people who I followed, and I turned that off too because when I go back to my phone, I am going to look at Twitter, and they'll still be there, and there's no urgency involved in that because anyone who needs me urgently can escalate to messages or phone calls. So, am I getting saner, Allie, or less sane? I don't know.
I think you and I are a lot alike with notifications, maybe with the exception of sounds. Like, I don't know. I have sounds on for Twitter. Otherwise, I think I'm pretty much the same as you. Like, I more did it for battery life, too, initially, because not having your lock screen light up every 2 seconds, people would be surprised how much battery you save. So I'm very much the same. Messages, VIP, stuff like that is the only thing that gets pushed through to my lock screen. Most of the time, my phone is on silent. So it just vibrates, and if it's on a table somewhere, that's part of the reason I like the watch too, because if I don't miss anything important, only the important things. I think I only let like messages. There's very few things I let come through to my wrist, and I think that amounts to messages, phone calls. Yeah, and I think that might be it, pretty much. Email I turned off because I feel like email in real life is not as urgent as messages. If you have something important to tell me, or Serenity does, or Peter, you're probably not going to send it in an email, you're going to send it in an iMessage. So, yeah, email I don't even mess with on the watch, and I think it's too small.
We're going to take a quick break so I can tell you about Automatic. Automatic is awesome. We've looked at it here before on iMore, but let me tell you about it again. It plugs into your car's diagnostic port. That's the one the manufacturer uses, and has it in every car since 1996. Every one of those cars has this port. You pair it with your phone, and then you drive around, and it connects your car to the internet. What can you do with it? Well, those check engine lights, the kind that drive Sheldon Cooper, Professor Dr. Sheldon Cooper, out of his mind. You can find out what's causing that in plain English. If it's a tiny problem, if it's not a significant problem, you can even turn it off right from your phone. You can log your trips, you can park at any location and never lose your car. It gives you feedback on your driving and helps you drive less aggressively and save on gas. And because you're driving less aggressively and saving on gas, you can drive even less aggressively and save on even more gas. There's crash detection. It automatically can detect a crash and call for help for free as well. A human will even stay with you on the line until your help arrives. Automatic also provides Nest integration. It can heat your home when you're on your way home. That right there is the reason the internet was created. It can also connect your car to countless other services like Google Docs, Twitter, Evernote, and connected home devices like Philips Hue. As I drive in, I could have my house heated and my lights come on and set themselves up for game mode. I am just saying. There's no subscription fees. There's a special offer with this podcast, though. You can get 20% off. Normally, Automatic costs $99.95, but with this offer, you can get it for just $80. That's $20 off. The URL is automatic.com/iMore. That's where I want you to go. Automatic.com/iMore. It ships in 2 business days for free. There's a 45-day return policy. I'm sure you're going to like it, but if you don't, they have confidence enough in their product to make you that policy. So just go to automatic.com/iMore today, get 20% off of Automatic, and you'll be happy that you did. Thanks, Automatic. I'm loving continuity, but I know Peter wrote about the tethering this week, but the continuity is so close to being great for me, but the part that's missing is driving me a little bit crazy. Like, for example, when my phone rings, I'm happy that it rings my phone and my watch, and I'm happy that it rings my Mac, but it always takes like the Mac 10 or 15 seconds to stop ringing after I've answered the phone call, and if I'm airplaying, my Apple TV is ringing when I'm getting the phone call. Peter, have you run into that with your Mac too?
I've run into it with Macs in the house that won't stop ringing even though the call has gone to voicemail or has been answered somewhere else.
Is there anything we can do about that, or is that just something we got to file a radar on?
I think that that's an implementation problem. I think that clearly there are still bugs that have to be worked out with some of the continuity capabilities. A lot of what I've been reading about speculation for 10.11 and iOS 9. And even on our own site, seems to deal with sort of battening down the hatches a little bit. Getting the seams worked out between this technology that was introduced in iOS 8 and Yosemite.
Well, and I feel like if continuity and handoff can listen for what apps I'm using, it can certainly listen for what device I'm on. So if I'm already on my Mac and I'm actively doing something, why can't it tell and not make 17 devices ring? I love that.
Messages does, right? Messages does that great.
Messages does that, but
Messages work well mostly, but yeah.
I'm wondering if calling has anything to do with the carriers.
I don't know. But here's the thing: that continuity between the watch and the phone works really well.
Yeah.
Where it knows if the phone is open, it's not going to ring the watch.
But that's using a Bluetooth connection, and I think that might speed things up a little bit, as opposed to, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the iPad, the Mac, everything else being on continuity calling is depending on your iCloud ID and some kind of relay between those that I don't think is done through Bluetooth.
It should be all the same. So basically, the Bluetooth LE connection broadcasts availability and negotiates the handshake, and then it hands off to Wi-Fi to do the actual data transfer because they need a big pipe for that. If the Bluetooth isn't working, it'll escalate to Apple's push notification system, which then involves the internet and is kind of less reliable. But theoretically, it should all be working the same. But I wonder.
Well, then fix it.
I wonder what you said. I wonder if the Mac is not detecting for unlocked iPhone the way the Apple Watch is.
That could be it. I don't know. I mean, because the worst thing ever is like if you have you get a call and I answer it, and then for 15 seconds I'm plugging one ear because all of my other crap is ringing. Right. So yeah, it's not a pleasant experience.
The problem I've had recently, I don't know if anybody else who's listening has had this, or if any of you have had this problem, is that FaceTime on the Mac takes forever to launch. So if I get a call and my iPhone happens to be in my pocket, I'll feel it buzzing long before I'll actually see any activity on the Mac to let me know that there's a call to take. That gets very frustrating and distracting.
And I've had the opposite. Sometimes my Mac rings in before I notice my phone.
I've noticed that it has entirely to do with what you want. So if you're right next to your computer, it'll ring immediately and never stop. If you're far away from your phone, it won't ring.
I think what you're saying is that it's screwing with you.
I think so. Sorry, Ren, you were going to say something about messages?
Oh, no, I was just saying that messages is 90% of the way there. Just really close, but not.
Yeah, the closeness is the frustrating part, because I think if it just didn't work well, I would kind of understand and not use it, but it's so close to being perfect that when it's not, it's that thing you start to rely on stuff, and then you rely on it enough, and when it screws you over, you're like, I knew this was coming. Fooled me twice, shame on me.
And I feel like there are certain instances, too, I've heard people complain, too, that if I delete a message thread or messages on my phone, why does it not delete on my Mac? And I think that's kind of a double-edged sword, because it could go the other way, where what if I accidentally deleted something I didn't want to delete on my phone, at least it's still on my Mac or my iPad. So I see a lot of those types of complaints, too, and I can see why that's kind of a issue to really mull over on Apple's part, because...
Well, they don't sync.
I don't know what's better.
They don't, and they can't sync the state of the message of old messages on your computers because they don't want to keep them. They don't want to have anything to do with them once they've delivered them. So they'll try to deliver messages. I think it's between 10 and 14 days, and it'll download it to that computer, and then that'll no longer be available, and that's just for security and privacy reasons. So if you delete it on your phone, they don't want to have any idea that you've done that. So there's no way for them to. And it maybe be convenient if they did sync it, but given their current the current philosophy. Or corporate priorities, they just want to have hands off after they've given it to you. It's email does that over IMAP. The email will do that if you're using an IMAP server, but there's no analog yet for messages, at least. Ren, now that you've had it for a week, I'm assuming you've had a little bit of derby time with it, but is there anything in general that you've done with the health and fitness stuff? Are you liking it?
Yeah, I'm liking it so far. Honestly, since I was traveling most of the week, my first sort of derby-ish experience with the watch happened last night, and I wasn't playing, I was just skating and coaching. However, I did do a speed skate before coaching, and I did an activity tracker. Sadness and sorrow, despite the fact that in the Health and Fitness API there is a trigger to, to record skating sports, that is not visible in the activity app on the watch. So the only thing that I can record it as is other. And in my 9-minute speed skate, despite the fact that I was basically hitting my target heart rate the entire time, it gave me very, very little credit for exercise, which I was very unhappy about. It's like, dude, this is really hard. This is the equivalent of as a high intensity exercise. And it was like, nope, 20 calories.
I think the workout app is very 1.0, and that's where I think it's almost better to use, and I think I'm going to post something on this, kind of a workaround is to use workout apps that are a little bit more mature in the App Store that can take advantage of health, and then it doesn't feed in your workouts the way that the workout app would to activity, but it still picks up the calorie counts and things. I'm pretty sure it reads from health as well. So if you're using an app that's depositing information in there, it should reflect it in your overall day. So
someone
maybe
just needs to build a skating app.
Yeah. I mean, they have one for skiing. Why not skating?
Yeah, well, it's shocking to me because in one of the most recent commercials, Apple shows a figure skater doing a sit spin or I think just a regular spin actually with a watch on, and I'm like, oh, does that mean that there's skating tracking? No, it doesn't.
It just looked pretty on the screen.
You get lumped in the other category that is not equal to other activities, I guess. Yeah, I don't know. It's 1.0. I don't know. Hopefully we'll see more. Or maybe they'll even just open up the API to where it can pull. I don't know. It's still kind of murky as to what developers have access to, what they can build on, how that's going to integrate with health, workout, activity. It's all very confusing still.
So I have two other quick questions because we're starting to run low on time. Serenity, you wrote about the tattoos, and that made all the media rounds. I think I saw it on TV the other day. So what's the deal with tattoos? What do people need to know?
First of all, good job getting out in front of this one.
Oh, I think we lost her. Oh, she's back.
Yep. Hold on. Thanks. My computer just went haywire. I can't see anything right now. Hold on.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Am I back?
Yes, you're back, and you brought tattoos with you.
Am I back? Is that good?
Yes.
Hooray! Yes, I did. Actually, I didn't. I have no tattoos. I am tattoo-less. However, I happened to be vacationing with a gentleman who has a fair amount of tattoos. So when we saw this story pop up, we did some in-depth testing of like, all right, let's see what the heart reader can and cannot see through. Artificial ink, and actually Apple updated their support doc today to include some information on why tattoos in the heart sensor may not get along. Basically, if you have deeply saturated artificial ink basically inside of your skin, it's going to make it harder for the heart rate sensor, which essentially uses infrared light and light, to bounce off of your blood vessels to see, oh, how much blood is running through your veins. If there's tattoo ink getting in the way there, it makes it a lot harder for that light to get through and bounce back and give an accurate reading. So if you have a really dark color tattoo or a solid tattoo or black ink basically saturating your skin around this area, you might be in a bit of trouble. However, I will say that most everybody I have seen with a full sleeve, their sleeve usually ends about here because you want to be able to wear collared dress shirts without your tattoo creeping out. So anybody who has, a traditionally cut tattoo sleeve should be fine with the watch. And even if you have a tattoo that reaches all the way up to your wrist here, you're probably going to be okay if the ink here is fairly light gray. Even variegated or pattern tattoos seem to be okay when we used it. But at the end of the day, like if you have a full-length sleeve that goes all the way up to your wrist, my suggestion is just go into an Apple store or find somebody with a watch and really see if you can test out those health sensors in person. You also have a 14-day return policy, so if you get a watch and then you discover that it's just not seeing through your tattoos, you have the option to return it.
So I guess the Apple Watch isn't going to be a big item of lust to any Yakuza, huh?
Apparently not.
Well, there's Ali posted how to connect to a heart rate monitor. If the heart rate monitor is your issue, you can get a third-party one. If it's the security setting which makes you log in if it's lost skin contact, then you might just have to disable the passcode and not use Apple Pay if you really want to watch and you have both wrists tattooed or you just refuse to wear it on your non-tattooed wrist.
Yeah, it does take away Apple Pay, which is kind of a bummer. But
yeah. Well, for everyone outside the U.S., we'll be just fine. Ali, you wrote, I don't know if it's live or not yet, but you wrote about how the Apple Watch is making you take a second look at applications.
Yeah, that did. I think it went up this morning. So I found myself giving apps another chance that maybe I previously didn't particularly care for, or not care for, but maybe like a good example was I've always used MyFitnessPal to log things about fitness, obviously, or meals and things. But it only gives me a brief glimpse on the Apple Watch of things, and for some people that's okay, and people that need to count calories religiously, that's probably a good way to go. They have a reminder on their wrist. But for people like me that maybe aren't as religious, Lifesum, I'm not crazy about their iPhone app, but their Apple Watch app lets me actually log meals in small, medium, and large categories, so I can quickly do it on my wrist and then go in and set those things if I want to later to be more specific. But it also lets me track water on my wrist, which is one thing I've been trying to do is drink a lot more water. So being able to do this stuff without having any interaction on my phone is awesome. It's one less thing that I have to do during the day that's going to distract me and make me get on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and everything else. So I've been looking for apps that more do that. So gym apps especially, I've never really found a lot that go hand in hand with being able to actually work out and not have to interact with my phone. So I found a couple that really do that well and put everything that's on my phone on my wrist so I can see, okay, I need to be doing squats or I need to be doing this. So I can kind of follow along with it without having any interaction with my phone. So I think that who said it? Ben Bajarin, and I think you brought it up on the last podcast. Computer hours, phone minutes, watch seconds. So I feel like developers that can nail and execute Apple Watch extensions in an efficient way have a whole new potential to basically reach a new market, because people that have a watch have it for a reason. I have it because I want to spend less time on my phone and more time with the people in front of me interacting with them. So an app that isn't going to do that for me is probably not one I'm going to install on my Apple Watch. So I found myself actually looking at apps that I use now and then second guessing, ooh, this one has a nicer Apple Watch extension that's a lot more meaningful. So I've second guessed productivity apps, other apps that I've used for a long time in favor of ones that are going to simplify my life even more. And I think that that's kind of going to be a trend with people that have watches. It's going to become a purchase factor.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I was experiencing Apple Watch rage apps because the Apple Store app updated with an Apple Watch extension, and with that you can just tap and you can see your orders. But on the iPhone app, you still have to put in a password. There's still no Touch ID, and now the watch is a better conduit to me getting updated order statuses in my iPhone, which is nuts to me.
It's baffling to me that the Apple Store app doesn't support Touch ID for order statuses and things. And I've had times where I'll go to an order status and then I'll accidentally tapping the back button tap a notification, and then I literally launch the app 2 seconds later and have to enter my password again. So for me it was like, okay, order status is on my wrist that I can see without typing a password. Great.
And there was another one. Instagram came out with a watch app right away. There's still no iPad app, and some people said that's because they still use crappy quality photos, and that would totally expose the crappy quality photos that they use. Fair enough, up your resolution. But also, there's an Apple Watch extension now, but there's still no Share extension. And again, people said, well, Instagram doesn't want to provide write access for anything but comments and likes. They don't want you to write photos straight to the service. I don't know if Apple needs an intermediary extension where it's just like send this to, instead of open in, like you just go to the Share extension, tap it, and it'll take the photo that you're looking at and move that over to Instagram and preload it for you, and Instagram still gets to control that experience. But there's still a lot of apps that don't give me native Share extensions, and I'm starting to get grumpy about it.
I think that's kind of what some photo apps have done with Instagram, and it's almost like I expect now when I launch an app. So I'll edit a photo and then share to Instagram, and it has to launch the share sheet and let me pick Instagram and then open it instead of just launching the app. So, yeah, I'm kind of the same way, and I find myself looking for that stuff, especially now after being so used to it with the apps that I use regularly. And that is another area where I've actually switched around some apps that I use because they have share extensions.
Yeah. All right. So coming up, Serenity, you're going to be at Jesse Chir's design conference during WWDC.
I will at Layers. I'm really excited for it. She has been telling me all kinds of crazy things that they have in store. I think it's going to be an awesome conference. It's being held right down the street from Moscone at Bespoke in the Westfield Center. And it's featuring a whole ton of really, really awesome speakers, myself excluded. You've got Scott Simpson, you've got Merlin Mann, you've got Susan Kerr, who designed the Mac icons. You've got Laura Savino, who is one of the best speakers I've ever been fortunate enough to see. Oh gosh, you've got Krista and Nevin Mergen, who are designers for Rogue Amoeba and Panic, respectively, and also an adorable couple with two really cute kids. There's just so many people who are. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they have to present, and I'm also looking forward to some of the fun magic that Jesse and I are planning for my stuff too.
Awesome. And Peter, you're going to be talking at Alt again?
I am indeed. Yeah. So if you're going to be in town for WWDC but you don't have a ticket, or if you were thinking about going to San Francisco for WWDC but you couldn't get a ticket, don't let that dissuade you from coming into town anyway, because there's a lot of stuff happening peripheral to WWDC, like Alt, which is free. It doesn't cost you anything to get into. You can mix and mingle with other developers and see some really cool talks, and even get free food on the first day. So Alt conference is definitely worth checking out.
Awesome. So what's on tap for this week, Allie? What are you going to be working on?
Oh, I haven't really decided yet. With
so
all
many
the
how-tos.
Apple Watch. Yeah, with all the Apple Watch tomfoolery, I haven't really had time to plan out my next week. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you can bet on some Apple Watch how-tos, probably some Apple Watch roundups of some sort. Yeah, so lots of things, and then I'll make sure to put some stuff up for non-Apple Watch people, so they don't want to pull their hair out if they don't really care about the Apple Watch.
They don't want to come after us.
Yeah.
What about you, Ren?
Well, I have a piece that's going up in a few minutes on should you use a stylus with your Apple Watch? No. Spoiler, no. I'm also working on some productivity tips for Apple Watch users. We're going to have our Bobble iPad Air 2 roundup coming out. I'm going to work on some tough problems with photos for OS X, what I hope gets fixed in the next iteration, and some fun stuff coming your way.
Awesome. What about you, Peter?
Well, lots of how-tos coming up next week. We seem to run into new stuff every week that people are having problems with, that I'm just trying to make sure they can deal with as clearly as possible. Got some cool hints and tips. If you're using Mac ID, which is a really cool app that lets you unlock your Mac with your Touch ID device, and a whole lot more.
So here's my dream, and I've already said this to the 1Password guys, so I don't mind sharing. You have Touch ID now on your phone. You have skin contact on your Apple Watch. I never liked Bluetooth Trusted Device because if I take off Peter's dongle, suddenly I'm Peter. And that sounds rude, but that's how you take someone's identity now.
How dare you touch my dongle?
So I never liked those, but now we have a Bluetooth trusted device that actually knows we're the one wearing it. It's aware enough to know who's doing it. And it would be super cool if either Apple or 1Password or LastPass just would unlock when it detects an Apple Watch owner within the very near vicinity, or Touch ID being unlocked within the very near vicinity. And there's all sorts of ways you can do that kind of stuff now. So I'm just putting that out there. You'd make me very happy come WWDC if we start getting a little bit of trusted Bluetooth action.
That would be very cool. I have to agree. It'd be like magic.
Trusted Bluetooth action. All right, Allie, if people are curious about following you on the interwebs, where can they go?
I am at iMuggle on all of the social things, so basically Twitter and Instagram, and every day on iMore.com.
Serenity?
At Settern, SETTERN, on both Twitter and Instagram, and on iMore.com, and occasionally on The Incomparable. I hear we might be going to a screening of Avengers this weekend and doing a live podcast, so Stay tuned.
Very nice. I'll be hitting up the Avengers this weekend as well. Can't wait. Peter, what about you?
Well, on all the social things at Flarg, Flargh, and on iMore.com.
Awesome. And you can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore. What's the new Instagram account, Spencer? Is it iMore TV? Yes, iMore TV on Instagram.
I think it's iMore Graham, isn't it?
We changed it.
Oh,
Yeah,
see,
iMore TV. Yeah.
We got locked out of the old one. I'll tell you the story later. Instagram. And you can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/iMoreVideo for all of these shows and a lot more. If you haven't already, please go to iTunes. Please subscribe. Please leave a review. It means a lot to us, and it encourages iTunes to feature us, which is really good for everybody. You're the best community in mobile. We love having you. Actually, best community anywhere. You're a handsome, talented, smart, and exceedingly generous group, and we adore that you're with us here every week. Have a great weekend, and we'll be back next week. Thanks, everyone. If there was music playing, I'd dance.
Do 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 do. Yeah, my watch is like, stand up, move around.
Oh, mine was.
Like,
I was trying to like.
I know. I was trying to like dance in the background.
But then I was like, if I'm cheating it, is it really doing me any good?
Just do the Arsenio Hall thing. That's just.
I know. I was trying to do this because it went off like at, I don't know, 10:50 or something like that. It's 10 minutes to the hours when they go off, I think.
Apple's explainer too said that non-rhythmic movements can confuse it as well. It's very good with rhythmic movements, not very good with non-rhythmic movements. I was doing air punching for the people on the audio stream. Not very good, but I was doing it. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.